the options and what percentage goes to all of it. But suffice it to say, this money is going to be put back into those in the greatest need within the Peachtree Corners community.
Welcome to Prime Lunchtime with Brian Johnson, a monthly podcast featuring the city manager and your host, Rico Figliolini. Taking the conversation beyond just talk, it's about getting the facts, discussing the issues, and asking honest questions of our city.
Hi, this is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life, and here now with Prime Lunchtime with City Manager Brian Johnson, who I'll be bringing on shortly. We're going to be discussing a few different issues, including multi-use development, ordinances, and things that are happening in the city. I hope you stay with us. If you have any comments, certainly put it into the comment section. If you have any questions, we'll get back to you with answers, hopefully. Bring it on to the next show as well. This episode is being sponsored by Peachtree Corners Magazine, as we're working on our next issue, so keep an eye on it. It'll be out the first week of June. So let me introduce and let me bring in, well, you've seen before, Brian Johnson, City Manager. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Rico. How are you?
Good. It's been a little while since we had the last one, and certainly there's things going on in the city, so exciting stuff. Why don't we start with, I think one of the things that we've talked about before has been the LPR cameras, the license plate reader cameras that's been installed in the city. And why don't you tell us what happened recently? I think that was brought up at City Council meeting as well. Something good, obviously, from it.
Well, so the mayor at City Council was referencing a report that was published by Flock, and it was in reference to the license plate reader cameras, the automated license plate reader cameras that we installed for use by Gwinnett PD. And so we installed 25 of them throughout the city in locations that Gwinnett PD identified as locations that could provide them opportunities for, use in the prosecution and, investigation and prosecution of crime. Right. So those were installed, and they've been up for a number of months, and we got a report back on how it was used. And why the mayor brought it up at City Council meeting is because he wanted everybody to kind of know that they were being put to very good use, that there were a number of instances in which a vehicle passed through one of the cameras. The camera read the license plate. The license plate had been on what's called a BOLO list, a be on the lookout list, by Gwinnett PD for a specific reason. There were issues like an individual registered to the vehicle was wanted for assault and battery somewhere, or grand theft auto, car was reported stolen, things like that. And in one case, we actually had, in fact, two cases, really, we have had unfortunate instances where we've had a discharge of a firearm within the city. One, thankfully, involved two individuals who were near the forum, in the forum area, who got inebriated and decided to pull out their firearms in the parking lot and shoot them in the air in celebration of something. Anyway, it was gunfire in the air, but it was still gunfire. And they got in their car, and Gwinnett PD, when there was the report of gunfire, looked at the camera and saw the vehicle that had been identified as to what the shooters had gotten into, and were able to follow the car and ultimately apprehend the individuals who were firing their guns. Wow. That was helpful. And then we also had an unfortunate incident 2 weeks ago, I guess, 2 to 3 weeks ago, in which there was a homicide at a gas station in South Peachtree Corners. And the shooter was identified through our LPR cameras because, again, an eyewitness put the shooter in a type of automobile, and then they used the network of cameras that were installed to ultimately trace where the car left. And they use cameras that they have access to even outside Peachtree Corners, and were able to ultimately find out where the car went to And then we're able to go to location and find out through the use of that automobile who the individual was. I don't know since then. I haven't actually had a conversation to know if they found him, but they actually, because of that camera, were able to put his mugshot, because he had a record, out as a bolo. And so, he is wanted for murder, and it was through the help of these LPR cameras. So they are being used. Again, the city doesn't have access to the cameras. They're being used by Gwinnett PD for these purposes, but it is being put to use, and it is taking criminals off the street, and it is helping solve crime because they have access to these cameras. So it was a great thing for the city, who doesn't run a police department directly within our city government. We have an intergovernmental agreement for Gwinnett County to do it, but it was a great way for us to provide them an additional crime-fighting resource and provide it at their disposal. And so that's why it was brought up, and that's what the program's about.
Interesting. The fact that cameras more and more today, whether it's a Ring camera on your door or a camera like this, it's just providing that much more security, the ability at least to follow up crimes, to find the perpetrators of these things. It just makes, and some people will feel safer. I certainly will feel safer that way. Some people might not feel like they're being intruded upon. But, it's interesting. The same people may want more police on the street. But this is exactly what that is, right? It's allowing police to be able to do their job more effectively in a broader range. Of course, I don't know, some people may not want that, may not feel it's necessary, but I certainly feel in a city this size that's certainly worth it.
So I certainly, in the city, mayor and council certainly appreciate the concerns about invasion of privacy and all of that. It's important to note that these cameras are only on public thoroughfares. Mm-hmm. They're only used in, the prosecution of crime. And it also is interesting that for the total amount that it costs to operate 25 cameras at 25 different locations in the city is still less money than it would be if we put one additional police officer on the street.
Wow.
And so, not to say that you don't have to have both, you absolutely do. But when you are trying to stretch money or provide the biggest bang for the buck, the most bang for the buck, it's a pretty good resource to be able to deploy that many eyeballs. It obviously can't do anything. You still need boots on the ground to make the arrest and do the other stuff, but it is certainly a force multiplier for departments, and we feel good about being able to provide them this additional resource.
Yeah, I'm glad the city's doing it. And you're right. I mean, it does provide a bigger bang for the buck, if you will, for safety's sake. So also, the city's been doing in other areas like the city did last year, getting onto a different subject, about business grants through federal rescue plan, the CARES Act, and providing businesses with the ability to continue their business, large and small, through a variety of grants. Same thing's happening this year, right? Through the American Rescue Plan now. The first half of this year, grants will be given out, and then I guess the second half of the year, some additional monies will be given out. So can you talk a little bit about that, about the type of businesses that would qualify for this, the monies that would be there, and what would qualify a business to be able to receive that?
So the American Rescue Plan Act, like you said, it is a second attempt by the federal government to inject, resources into the economy to help those who have been affected by COVID, and either help them, keep propping them up for them to live to fight another day and make it through this, or help them recover from it, whatever. So we are going to be getting about $9 million over the course of the next 12 months. Half within about the next 30, 45 days, and then the second half a year from when we get the first check.
Gotcha.
And the money is, in fact, to go towards certain things. Now, this one versus the CARES Act has got a lot more guidance and a lot more. In fact, I have right here, the CARES Act was basically like, look, if you could show that you were, harmed financially due to the pandemic, that CARES Act money could go to help with that. So you could show that you lost revenue or you had COVID-related expenses. That was basically all the guidance we were given. This time, it's a little bit more specific. The eligible use of funds falls under basically 4 categories. One is investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. One is for provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue. In other words, the city or counties could use this to plug holes in revenue streams that are decreased due to COVID. 3, it would be responding to workers performing essential work during COVID. And this would be essentially to cities pay themselves back for extra time that police or fire were out there, or for hazard pay or those kind of things. And then the last one is for assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or to aid in impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. And that'll be the main one that we're going to end up having, that eligible use will be the main one we're using. And so we're looking at breaking the money up into a few different categories, if you will. We do think that there will be a component of it that'll go to companies directly that were impacted to help their bottom line, to help keep them afloat, similar to the CARES Act. We do think that there will be some going to nonprofits that are specifically providing service to Peachtree Corners residents. And those nonprofits, their mission would be to provide some sort of assistance to groups that were affected. So we didn't do nonprofits last time. We did it directly to businesses. We will definitely have a nonprofit component this time. Okay. We are probably looking at some sort of a capital improvement component. And by that, I mean, there may be some money eligible for businesses that have property maintenance needs that they've been unable to address because of either they didn't have enough money during COVID, or they had to spend more money because of COVID and they don't have to do it. And the reason that's there is because we may have businesses that fold or leave, but the structures that these businesses occupy in the city will not. So we are worried about there being some, derelict buildings and structures that are left behind by businesses leaving. So we want to make sure in some cases it would be us giving money to a business, but we say, here's money for you, but you can't just use it wherever you want. You have to use it on your building or on your property.
Would that be something like, and maybe this is not, but like that Burger King building on Spalding and Holcomb Bridge? Burger King closed down that building. It's been abandoned essentially for a while now. Obviously an eyesore and could be dangerous as well. Does money go towards maintenance or also towards raising a building, bringing it down or something?
It could probably ultimately go to both. Now, the city won't end up using it to demo it itself, but we could give it to an owner of said structure and say, hey, if you're looking to redevelopment and you couldn't quite get over the hump because of COVID, let's help you do something productive with that building, or let's help you bring it back up into code compliance, or we'll let you use the money for facade improvements because the facade needs a facelift.
Sure.
That would be some aspect. Again, the percentages are still yet to be determined. That's going to probably be the biggest thing, is what percentage of this pot of money do we do to each of these categories? Because you can do a lot in one and end up creating a problem, or the need is greater in another. You didn't do it. And so those are some of the things we're doing now. We're even looking into maybe helping those who could be behind on certain utilities. That they were unable to pay certain utilities, and we can essentially pay like a Georgia Power or a Gwinnett County Department of Water Resources, for delinquent utilities for those who lost their jobs or whatever. We're exploring that, and certainly the hotel and restaurant business are ones that we're looking specifically at because, there was a time, and even with hotels that, or I guess restaurants that, they're still not back to normal.
Right. Well, and some of them are doing improvements. Like I know I saw Fire and Stone Pizzeria just added a canopy on top of their outdoor patio.
And we work with them to increase the area outside so that he can have more seating out there because people are a little bit more apt to eat right now in places that they can eat outside. And so restaurants are needing to do that. And so, yes, so there's a lot of need. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of more flexibility this time than CARES Act, but there's also greater need than we'll have the money for. So we're, mayor and council are going to be carefully considering the options and what percentage goes to all of it. But suffice it to say, this money is going to be put back into those in the greatest need within the Peachtree Corners community.
Is there going to be sort of a public hearing or something to gather input from people that might want to suggest where the money gets put, or is there a component of something like this, or how is this drawn up? And then people have to apply for it, right?
Right. Now, there will be an application process. Once mayor and council decide how it's going to go, then we will then take it and create all of the background and the notification about what it's coming. I will tell you, when the announcement of the Rescue Plan Act came out, since that point, I have had a steady stream of recommendations since then, so I'm not void of community input. And I know mayor and council are in the same boat. But, I gave you the eligible use of funds, and it has to meet that.
Right.
For us to spend it. So while we have a few more types of uses than CARES Act did, we are still heavily regulated on how it's done, and we will always err on the side of caution, and we do not want to be like some of the other horror stories that you hear out there that have, misused this stuff, and now they're in trouble, and, we're not going to do that, and we didn't do it the first time, so we'll be very careful of how we spend it.
So the deadline at some point will be over the next 30 to 45 days, I guess, that officially the city will put out the application and the deadline date, I guess, that people can.
Yeah, so let's just say within the next 45 days, we should be receiving the first half.
Okay.
At that point, and then a year from that point, we'll get the second half. But regardless of when we get the money, we have through the end of 2024 to spend it all.
Oh, okay.
So we have a period of time. Now, I will tell you this. Mayor and council are intent on spending the money the right way for the right use, but doing so as soon as we can spend it because they feel like the economy and people hurt by the pandemic are at their greatest risk right now. As more things open up and the pandemic, hopefully goes away and we return back to whatever the normal looks like on the backside, but that people will be stronger every day going forward into the future. So we're trying to put it into the local economy and help people as soon as we can because they're at the greatest, there's a greater need today than they will be tomorrow and then the next day and the next day.
It makes sense. Holding it for 2 or 3 years doesn't make sense.
Right.
Especially, and I can understand why they have that, I guess, but I also see why you want to put it out there sooner than later. Be more effective that way. Let's get on to a couple of I've been going through the city council agenda for those that are not aware that recently was held and stuff. So I'm going to be a bit out of order. There's a first reading consideration of something that I found interesting that before we started the show that I wanted to ask about. And this has to deal with also COVID, has to deal with the way life is changing, the way people are working, living in traffic and all that. So I know the city wants to get ahead of something like this. And this has to deal with the apartment hotel, an amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow apartment hotel special use. And we were talking about that because on the face of it, I didn't understand what that meant, but now I understand. It's like if you're going to build apartments, you do it from scratch, or do you find a hotel that has no occupancy or 20% occupancy, and maybe that chain needs to get rid of that less producing hotel, and now what do you do with that? So, we were discussing how it's cheaper, obviously, to take an existing building and repurpose it. That was one of the reasons that the Peachtree Parkway multi-use development is repurposing the office building that's there, right? Because it's rather than taking it down and rebuilding a new one, you could just take what's there and reusing it maybe. Same thing with hotels. So explain again to our listeners what this amendment to the MUD means, to the zoning ordinance actually, about hotels being converted if that's the opportunity arises.
So what we're seeing nationally and even in Peachtree Corners is the pandemic has really, affected a lot of industries more than others. The hotel industry being one that's been, significantly impacted. And so there are hotel owners that are sitting on properties that just cannot make it anymore. And so some of these hotel owners are looking at what can I do with my property? I had this hotel that it was doing just fine, but now for, pandemic reasons, it's not. I don't see it improving. People aren't going to travel as much. Business travel is certainly not going to be the same. So they have started out of sheer desperation, if you will, to explore what could they do with the property. And one of the things that they're doing is exploring possibility of converting a hotel into an apartment building. And so we have had at least one instance in which the owner, kind of an exploratory way, said, hey, does the city have any regulation on its books for a conversion? So it got us thinking that, look, if this is going to happen here, like we're seeing elsewhere, we probably should do some things to at least try to keep it from getting out of hand. Right. One. And then two, mayor and council is, I'd like to think that we won't, but my fear is we're going to be faced with a decision or two regarding this issue. You're going to have a hotel that probably has lost its corporate flag. Maybe it's no longer a Marriott property or a Hilton property or something like that. And now it's just, a random hotel. And when that happens, then that means immediately the room rates are going to go down. You're not going to be able to attract the same type of traveler. And desperate people do desperate things. And what we don't want to do is to see hotels transition like that and then become locations for long-term stay for people who are transient. You run into squatters, you run into sometimes crime. I mean, it's not it's a broken window theory of things, and you don't want to go down that road. But then conversely, you're always like, in some cases, hotels may not be in the best location for what you would think is a good location for apartments. And so it's going to be a difficult one, but we are prepared for it to happen. And so what you're referring is an ordinance that will set some regulations that if somebody is wanting to do it, there's the baseline for what a conversion would look like if council approves it.
So essentially, I mean, if I could extrapolate it even out, because as you were saying, I was thinking extended stay hotels and hotels that I don't know, if most people understand that sometimes hotels are not owned by the hotel chain. They could be franchises of a hotel chain. So they do lose their flag sometimes because for a variety of reasons, maybe, but they have to do something. And occupancy rates have been dropping and dropping. And even though they seem to be coming back, friends are traveling more. I see this. Cruise ships are going out a little bit more now. Hotels are filling up a little bit. But usually in the resort areas, right? Where, a lot of our hotels were for business travelers coming into Technology Park and all that. So that's changed a bit, right? So I can see this coming where someone may say, I have this 40-year-old hotel or 30-year-old extended stay hotel, and I think we can make this into apartments because we already have extended stay guests. Why not just make it apartments? But I would imagine, I haven't looked at the ordinance, but I would imagine there are special use approvals that are necessary certain amounts of improvements have to be made. It can't just be all of a sudden, quote, a hotel an apartment when it's really a
Yeah,
hotel.
no, I mean, that's a good point, Rico. Is this is a transition process and it comes with a lot of prerequisites if it were to happen, and it is a special use. So it's not an automatic conversion, it's not a conversion by right.
Mm-hmm.
So council's got to issue a special use permit for it to happen.
Right.
But what we wanted to do is be prepared for if that ask comes. We wanted to be prepared to actually kind of have had a chance to think about, okay, what would we want to see if council were inclined to say yes in lieu of the alternative? And again, there's some horror stories about hotels that the owner either doesn't care or can't afford to do anything, and it just they just keep dropping the rates until they can fill the rooms, and they're filling it with people who, you don't necessarily want in transient housing.
Sure, and it happens. I mean, crime, unfortunately, comes with that, and we've seen it already in several hotels in the Norcross Peachtree Corners area. So where there's been a shooting or a death because of things like that, whether it was in the parking lot or whatever was being done. Are there specific things that you'd like to see if a hotel came to you with that aspect? Are there a couple of top things that they have to do to even be considered for that type of conversion?
I mean, conceptually speaking, I think the city's going to want to have these things to be self-contained, meaning, you got secured grounds, one ingress, egress point. You want to keep it similar to that. You're going to want amenities. To make sure that the units are, occupied by, people that we would like to see in apartments. There's going to be a requirement. There are still, pool, and workout facility aspect to it. You can't just do away with that. There's minimum square footage of units so that they're not micro units.
Right.
Those are
kitchen.
Right.
Kitchen and stuff. Okay.
You got to have, so those are kind of some of the things. It's got to be a real apartment. It is a real, it's not this efficiency. It's not, it's got to be a real conversion. But, I think the one good thing, I guess, on these conversions is, the amount of rooms that you can get out of a hotel is like, a quarter. You can get about a quarter or less apartment units out of the number of hotel rooms, just because hotel rooms are small. They're not, hotels. So, usually these conversions involve multiple rooms being gutted to a degree and then combined into one apartment unit. You try to work around maybe saving some of the plumbing where the kitchen would go, keeping one of the bathroom locations, trying to work around that. But, they have the hallways and the doors to the units, which are what an interior entry apartment would look like. And so those are kind of the conversions that we, the conceptual things that we would like to see for a conversion to even be considered.
Okay. All right. There's been other developments as far as the approval for multi-use, 9.2 acres. We reported on this before. I think it was mentioned also on our website when that was approved this past city council meeting. So what's that's an exciting thing, I think, because we're talking about a lot of units there. We're talking about the multi-use first real type multi-use in the city, right? Development to a degree. When do you think that'll, what's the timeline that they've expressed to the city that they may be doing this in?
I think that they're going to potentially start work of some sort within the next 3 to 6 months. Now, what they've got to do is take the conceptual plan and then create construction documents out of that. And so there is a period of time that we all have to, remember. Upon council approval of these projects, the developer can only go so far and until they have approval by council, because it doesn't make sense to go into the weeds of designing all the way down to construction documents, bid ready, if the risk that council could say no is still there. So companies only go so far. And so you're going to see, I think, as that's going on, you'll potentially see some demolition of some of the single story office condo complex. That's all being demoed. And I don't know the answer to this, but I know that there's like at least one, maybe two leases that still need to run a little bit before the current occupant is relocating elsewhere. So there's some work, but I think, they're going to want to do this as fast as they can. And so I think you may see selective demolition start before too long. I definitely know that they are knee deep in the architects transitioning into construction documents. And when they're ready to go, they're going to blow and go quick. I mean, these kind of things, they have construction loans, and every day that they're holding the money that they can't turn around and start generating income off of selling townhomes or renting apartments is money that they're losing.
For sure. And I think with Janet Yellen and some of these other economists talking about an economy that might heat up a little bit, where interest rates may start rising in a year or two, I got to imagine that people will be looking to secure those loans sooner than later, because I can't imagine getting it any cheaper than it is now. Right.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, I think we've covered most of what I wanted to get onto. Have you heard anything more about the other apartment that's been approved, obviously, at Town Center? Nothing more there, I guess, or the original planned Indigo Hotel, which doubtful that that'll happen at this point. But anything going on there that you can share?
No, there is some movement within the ownership group of that parcel that there's indications that they may be starting to, compile all the information they need to get back in front of council. So I would not be surprised if that happens sometime over the summer.
Okay.
They're in front of council. And again, remember too, council did deny the application for townhome community on Jaybird.
Yes. That's right.
At the city council meeting too. So, council and planning commission, together that went through a process, and then the community was involved in letting both groups know how they thought. And ultimately, city council was like, look, we don't think that's the right type of use for that area. Too dense. It's got a lot of, challenges to it. And we hear the community. And so they denied it. So, all these cases, you and I tend to talk about them we talk about them a lot of times in conceptual, fashion, meaning it's not been in front of council or it is done and what is it going to look like. But in the meantime, there's a lot of details behind the scenes that are considered and debated, and council's doing a lot of sausage making when it comes to trying to get smart on these kind of things, and they take them each one very seriously. And sometimes they get approved pretty easily. Sometimes council through, me work very hard trying to amend and adjust the original product from the day that it hits the city to the day they're voting on it. So it's much different. And sometimes they just flat out deny it. And this is an example where they ultimately just denied it.
Yeah, and I know that the Planning Commission, and I know you guys spend a lot of time and effort in going through this and working with developers to make sure they understand what's allowed, what's not allowed. I know that particular piece of property was up against low density housing also, and didn't make sense. But just because something on the face of it doesn't look like it makes sense to do, doesn't mean that's an easy no, right? Because legally you have to also look at the right of use of a property and all that. So I'm glad that, you guys are doing a great job. There's very little that I've ever seen that you all don't do what I feel that, what I personally feel you guys need to be doing on it. And, city council, I understand some people may think that's an easy job and it's a part-time job. And by the way, it doesn't pay much. But city council people, as opposed to planning department people or city government people, that's a career job, right? You get paid good money for doing a tough job. And city council people have to spend 20 hours, 30 hours a week sometimes in their job just to make sure they're doing the right thing for the citizens. So that's not an easy job either. So I'm glad that they have a good team behind them in city government being able to come up with good answers, at least that they can work from. So we
try.
Yeah, I'm glad that's happening. So, and the city's doing well. So I don't foresee, I don't see too many problems out. I don't see any problems out there really, quite frankly. So Glad you all are doing a good job. Glad that you give us the time every month to be able to ask you questions and to get good, solid answers and information from Brian. I appreciate the work you do for us. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rico. Thanks for this opportunity and everything you're doing to help, disseminate information.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Take care, and everyone else, stay tuned for other episodes of Peachtree Corners Life and this episode that we do every month of this podcast. If you have questions, feel free to message me, email me. If you have story ideas, I'm all for that. I cover the city as well as we can. So if you have story ideas, suggestions, email me. It's editor, editor, at livinginpeachtreecorners.com. Any suggestions? Of course, that doesn't mean we'll put everything on the website or in the magazine, but if you're not providing those suggestions to me, I have no idea where to get some of these ideas from, although we're overflowing with them as well. Does that make sense? Reach out to me. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any stories, ideas as well. Thank you.
You've been listening to Prime Lunchtime with Brian Johnson, the city manager of Peachtree Corners, Georgia, with your host, Rico Figlione. This show is part of a family of podcasts produced by Peachtree Corners Magazine and Mighty Rockets. To find more episodes of this show or our other podcasts, visit livinginpeachtreecorners.com or follow us on Facebook at Peachtree Corners Life.